Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Toolbox, your home for finance, tech, fitness, and anything else you find interesting. I'm Scott, that is,
Ryan Fossage.
and today we're going to be talking about Fed rate cuts and big tech and big energy starting to morph into the same thing.
Before we get there, though, I gotta talk a little bit about this coffee. So I don't think I was paying attention to what I was doing this morning, and I have a coffee grinder, and you normally set it to four, and you put that in the French press. I think I did the four, and then forgot I did it. Came back, ground up another 4 units worth of coffee grounds, and had like a basically double fueled sort of coffee. And this is some pan shitting coffee right now. This
Oh, God.
is like Negan said in The Walking Dead. I hope you put your shitting pants on because you're about ready to shit your pants. That's what we're working with this morning. So the energy is going to be good, I think.
I love it, man. I know most of the listeners may not be aware that you are a hardcore fan of caffeine that can handle it with the best of them. On the other hand, did not even start drinking coffee until I had kids, and now I'm chemically addicted and don't care at all about the taste and just physically need it to survive.
Yep. That's called adulthood.
Uh,
Awesome. So what are we starting with today?
Well, as I opened with, I think the big news, would be remiss if we didn't mention it, were the Fed rate cut announcement yesterday. I
Yeah.
opened my crypto wallet and saw everything dropped significantly, and I'm like, oh boy, something had to happen. And then I started, frantically looking around to see what happened because I was working and came across, of course, it was the news with the Fed reducing rates. I believe it was 25 basis points. But I think the big thing was announcing the roadmap for next year is going to be substantially fewer cuts than people were estimating. And this topic is very broad, but one thing that I think is worth note here, I remember back in, I don't know, January, February, Q1 of 24, I remember people saying, "Oh, 6 rate cuts are priced in for this year. Those are priced in. The market's going down if we don't get 6 rate cuts." And there weren't 6 rate cuts, and they weren't. And the ones we did have weren't big, and the markets hit all time highs in a damn election year. Okay, so it's like some of this I almost think is just you know sell the news. I feel obligated to act like this is meaningful. That's that's one opinion I have on it. I mean, there obviously are real implications of what that rate is. I'm not denying that, but I do think much of this is just a sell the news moment where the true outcome and impact of this on the actual business ecosystem is going to be relatively limited.
Yeah, I think the market is obviously going to react, and I think a good portion of that is algorithm or sort of algorithmically. Gosh, words. Apparently, the coffee's not strong enough.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe
Um,
triple it
but
next time.
a lot of that's driven by the algos. But a couple of things, like just more broad view with interest rates and just the state of things. I think there's a couple. The Fed has itself in a tight corner. On one hand, inflation seems stubborn, and I forget the exact print of the CPI and the PPI, but it's not coming down. It's not necessarily gaining, but it's just sort of holding steady, which is not bad, not terrible. But if you keep reducing the interest rates, I think you have a chance to reignite inflation, which the Fed definitely doesn't want. However, the Fed also definitely wants to bring down interest rates because then it makes it cheaper for the U.S. government to service its debt. And since we're going to run massive deficits, you want to be able to service that debt as cheaply as possible. So there's like real political motivation and incentive to bring down that interest rate in order to like just reduce the debt service of the country's
Mm-hmm.
um, borrowing. And on that, I think what we really should do is we should look to see how the Treasury bonds reacted. I should pull that up. I should have thought about that. Maybe I'll pull it up here in a minute. Um,
Well,
I think that's probably better. Like
yeah.
if the 30-year note, if the percentage on that either goes up or go down, I think that's a better indicator of what is forecasted to happen to the economy. Um, but if you just go look at the federal funds rate on Fred, anytime you start cutting basically to the level of what we've done already so far, we brought it down, I think, close to 3/4 of a point over the last,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I think there was 3 cuts this year.
Yeah.
Um, almost every time that starts coming down, it always leads to a recession. And part of it, the reason is we're cutting, a lot of the cuts occur for a reason. A lot of it's to try and stimulate the economy. And you only try and do that when the economy is not stimulating itself, when it's not growing naturally on its own. So I think they express caution. And of course, I mean, also people just have so many profits, even since Trump's been elected, that I think any excuse to lock in a few profits is something that we should have expected and is rational and makes sense. Um, but yeah, I don't know if the Fed is really going to be able to dictate what we do going forward. I think it's going to be data driven, like they always say,
Yeah.
and I think there's definitely strong incentive, like I mentioned earlier, for them to continue to try and push that rate down. How far, I don't know, but it is interesting. It's fun to watch. Always kind of what is the game theory, sort of going through the game theory of what could happen next is always fascinating.
Yeah, of what you said, the thing that I had not actually thought of. This kind of goes back to my sell the news moment, but there are a lot of people who are probably quite happy to cash in some profits right now from the post election bump, and this does feel like one of those defendable excuses to cash out a little bit and pull some profits. I think there's something to that in this one, but the rate itself, you know, they raised the rates. The formal narrative is to address inflation, and I bought groceries over the last 5 years. I get it. That definitely did happen. But I do think, in sincerity, the last 2 years, it has been extremely limited, just based off of my lived experience. you know, and it's like, obviously, there was going to be a lot of inflation because we just pummeled $7 trillion into the economy during COVID. And it still baffles me how everybody politicized that so much. Like, that was obviously going to happen when you do that, you know? And like how people act like it's a red blue thing, it's just like that's just the clear outcome of shoveling $7 trillion into people to keep an economy moving. Anyway,
Yeah, absolutely.
so and then if you look at the rates, they were literally at zero for and if they're at zero, you're effectively just taking off the table a tool to manipulate to kind of help guide the outcome of the economy, and it can't be at literally zero forever. I mean, I lucked out. I bought a house in 2020, and I can't move now because of the mortgage rate that I have. And when you look at these inflation numbers, what it seems to me like is that they're not weighted well. I worded that poorly. They're not terribly reflective, again, of the lived experience of most people. They, if you own a home, your mortgage payment is effectively locked. Property taxes can have an impact on that. I get it, but the way they track shelter in these is almost like a survey. It isn't really like, in the
Yeah.
form of j- getting the actual number we're paying for mortgages. So it's more reflective of what rent prices are. And I
Real quick on that, I believe what they actually do is they call up landlords and they ask if this unit was vacant, what would you charge for it?
mhm,
So, like you said, it's very survey based in that regard for the housing portion of the index versus being more factually driven,
yeah,
is how I would probably put that. And I think you're right. The lived experience versus what the number prints is different. I think the number is always lagging behind what the lived experience is. Um,
mhm,
I've heard that brought up several different times, but what that lag is, I'm not exactly sure. It probably expands and contracts that lag depending on sort of what sort of
yeah,
cycle we're in and sort of the larger, broader economic setting. But yeah, I'm with you on that.
yeah.
Certainly by no means a perfect measure.
Yeah, and like the rates too. Like that's another thing. I mean, I think so much of the impact of the perceived inflation is home prices because again, I bought a house that I lucked out.
So
I
I
bought
bought
the
a house
bottom. Yeah,
2 weeks ago. I feel like inflation's crazy.
yeah,
Like I tell my wife, like I could afford a nicer place in 2015 than I can afford now, and I make probably double the amount of money I make now. And making double the amount of money won't keep up with housing costs that rose 3, 4x, or maybe even 5x over that time.
hmm. No, it's almost like there's people like me who feel locked in because of these rates. I mean, not that I'd be moving anyway, but I feel like there's eventually going to come a time where people just lose their will and say, "Screw it, I'm going to downsize. I don't care," or they screw it, I'm going to buy, I don't care. And that gets into a lot of topics about the availability of single family homes and zoning and things that get way off topic of the interest rates. But I think, and the other thing about interest rates too, is I think we just oversell the true impact of what these have on the real business world. Like, I get it, if you're a small tech startup, it's probably very critical to you because people looking for returns can't get it in the form of bonds and treasuries and safer instruments, so they're forced to just shovel billions of dollars into VCs, and I get it for that. But like, do we really honestly consequentially think that if the Fed rate drops from 5 to 4.75, it's gonna in any meaningful way impact the bottom line of a reasonably stable mid to large size business? Like, that's not gonna, if that cripples your business isn't a good business. You know?
Well, I agree with you on halfway. The stuff in the S&P 500, it probably has a very negligible effect on it. But like the Russell 2000, all the small cap stocks, like 50% of those are just not profitable. And they are borderline zombie companies that are using debt in order to keep them alive to hopefully get to a point where they can achieve profitability. And that interest rate is meaningful to those sets of companies because the lower interest rate means you have a longer runway to get to profitability. A higher one means you have a shorter runway. So I think there's a dichotomy on who it really impacts and what the significance is.
Yeah.
Someone like a Google, your big cap stocks, no, they don't. It's probably negligible. If anything, it might just, if they find attractive rates, they might issue bonds to raise money cheaply. I think lots of companies did that when interest rates were borderline free.
Yeah, I mean, like, I found myself on a couple calls recently with individuals who keep talking about how much just money is sitting on the sidelines, just desperate to invest in specifically infrastructure, data centers, things like that, are a lot of the energy, and that'll kind of dovetail us into the next topic. But it's like I sit and hear these calls, and then I try to square in my mind, okay, interest rates are higher, people are wanting to put money to work. I'm like, and I sit there, I say, okay, well, right now you can get a better return, you can get a decent return just buying short-term bonds, but also I sit there and I think, is it really that hard to find? Is it really that hard to find these smaller companies to invest in? Or put differently, these smaller companies, instead of having to take out a loan, can't they just sell equity to these groups that are just sitting on this dry powder that are apparently desperate to invest in something? And, can a quarter point impact on the interest rate really, again, I just go back to, I get what you're saying, that if you have to finance your whole company with debt to get a runway to get rolling, I get that, yes, but fundamentally, I still think if what you're trying to build and grow into, if it is fully predicated on an interest rate going from 3 to 5, whether it's going to work, it wasn't going to work. I mean,
You probably agree.
it'd be one thing if it was like 2 to 25%. Okay, I'll give you that. But it just feels to me like this is more of a narrative driven excuse to sell off. I love that point you made, by the way. I totally buy that. And I think I opened this whole topic with crypto and looking at my wallet yesterday, and I think you're totally right that people are looking for an excuse to call little profits in, and I'm hoping the bull run kicks back in. But to maybe dovetail this into the next topic, you were mentioning big tech and how these interest rates, I mean, they have the lowest cost of capital you can imagine, and they have more money they're sitting on than you can imagine. Their investments, and a couple articles that I read this week that I thought were worth note were, I caught one about Oklo. This is one of those small modular reactor SMR companies. Sam Altman, OpenAI, he's an investor in this. I hate to say that. I think the fact that's true is probably the only reason this made the news. But they signed a deal with Switch Data Centers, very big player in the data center space. I don't want to belittle that. They're enormous, big company. This is big dollars here. But if I read this article right, if I read this correctly and understand it correctly, this is a nuclear power deal that's an option. That's not a commitment. They're in no way committing to paying this company Oklo any money. This is a you are giving us the ability to maybe buy power from you one day before 2044. Okay, like
is it based off of like milestone developments that Oklo has to achieve in proving small nuclear reactors being feasible?
that's minutia that wasn't described, and I'm sure that's engaged in this deal somehow. But what I really think this is just killer marketing for both sides, and the people who are going to lose out on this are buying at the top investors. But like, this is a huge win for Oklo because they get to say they have a deal with a big name in the space. This is a huge win for Switch because they get to say they're forward leaning into clean baseload energy and what the next gen technology is. It's a great win from a PR standpoint, but like, no one's agreeing to build anything. No one's agreeing to build a thing in a location at a time. That's not in this anywhere. And I sit there and I'm like, if I'm the CEO of Oklo and I can just go to Switch and get my stock to go up 19% for signing a hypothetical, we might build something for you someday at a certain size, I'm going to go to every single effing data center developer out there and I'm going to have them sign the same deal.
Yeah.
Like what is your downside? Like if you're Digital Realty, if you're Equinix, what is your downside to just sign this exact same deal? You know, I struggle to grasp that because also it probably gets you a little bit tied in with OpenAI to maybe win some leases one day, knowing Sam Altman's involved. But again, I see this stuff and I'm just like, I hope it happens because it's important for our electrical grid to again decarbonize, and I get the whole story there. But I just read these articles sometime and I'm so sensitive to it being vapor, you know?
Well, I mean, if you're just now thinking that news and media puts vapor out there, then welcome to catching up. I mean, that's part of the game too. I mean, that's marketing, is to build hype. I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm kind of for it, honestly, to bring more attention to small nuclear reactors so people can start thinking about that, so a conversation can be had, hopefully convincing people to think about like real life choices of, if you say you're so committed to being green, what are you willing to do? I think small nuclear reactors are something that we should continue to explore. And yeah, there's risk, but again, weigh the risk with the perceived, impending global crisis with warming temperatures, with what could happen at a small nuclear reactor. And like in my mind, whether you believe the full extent of the global crisis or not, I think like just the risk of a small nuclear reactor and exploring that technology, I think the trade-offs make it super attractive.
Well, to be clear, I'm for small nuclear reactors. What frustrates me about this is just, I wish it said, Oklo is building a 30 megawatt facility for Switch at their Grand Rapids facility to come online in 2027. Like, that would be super cool. And I'd be super excited about it.
The actual commitment to it is what you're
and exactly, like it's frustrating to me, like, how all this stuff feels like PR when a lot of, frankly, in that business right now, a lot of stuff is getting built out straight up natural gas right now, and
EQT, man.
Yeah, I know, right? One thing that I wanted to note on this whole topic, like, I remember my career's been in the data center business, and I remember, call it like 6-7 years ago or so, I remember I was in a presentation, and the keynote guy had his big pretty slide in there, and it said, data is the new gold. Data is the new oil, is what he was saying, which I think was kind of a refrain we heard for a while. And what I think is interesting is just like, data isn't really the new oil. It's like the companies using data are just becoming energy companies. Like Microsoft with 3 Mile Island, AWS bought that Talon Energy site, which is right next to a nuclear reactor. Sam Altman's investing in nuclear startups. Bill Gates is investing in nuclear startups. And all of these data center companies are having to build out on-site power plants. Like I think it's like that, data is the new oil was the intermediary step before everything ultimately coming full circle and the biggest companies in the world being energy companies again.
Yeah, I mean, data is the kind of thing that almost insists upon itself, or maybe energy is. We'll have to workshop that because the only way to have data and to use data is energy,
Yeah.
is to have energy.
You're
And
definitely onto
obviously with
something there, but it needs a
AI,
workshop.
yeah, there's something there. There's something there for sure. I mean, because data can't fuel itself. So there's still an energy component that's
Yeah.
massive.
I've seen those charts of like the Human Development Index of countries and how like there is no such thing as
Yes.
a low energy demand developed country, and it's
No.
almost like it isn't so much we're generating a bunch of data. Well, that's probably also true. The more data we generate, we'll just find a way to use the data. But I think the underlying thing there that all of it's predicated on is if we find more energy, we're going to find a way to use more energy. And I think that's something that is interesting. How these companies, it's almost like they're coming. They're 20 years ago, Chevron, Exxon, BP, these were the big behemoths globally, and they were energy companies. And now it's we kind of took a mild detour as big tech became what it became, and now they are needing to become energy companies to support their growths in other areas. And I think that's really telling. And another note on energy to take this a little more fun and you well hell you want to talk about vapor, but I did read an article this week about a fusion group, nuclear fusion group, signing a deal to provide grid scale power in Virginia over the
Okay.
course of I want to say it was the early 2030s. They said to finally have it online. So still 10 years before Oklo.
Fusion, not fission.
Fusion, correct? Yeah, I caught that, and again, I said this last episode, but I'm a pretty big believer in the Elon Musk school of thought of we already have fusion energy. It's just 93 million miles away. I'm a pretty big believer in that. But it is it's sometimes it's easy to get cynical and think we haven't really made that many developments over the years. But I mean, the fact that things like that are even remotely in the pipeline of commercially existing, it is pretty cool that we've accomplished that.
I was thinking about that last night, and you know, we finalized and built an atomic bomb in 1944, which was 80 years ago. And if you think about the microchips in our phone, it is exponentially easier to create a nuclear bomb than it is to produce the microchips that sit in this thing. And I'll illustrate that with this one example. So microchips are based on like nanometers. So what is the spacing between transistors? Down at the 3 nanometer size, which I think is today's smallest size, which is going to mean you're going to be able to put more transistors on a single chip, which makes it more powerful essentially. 3 nanometers is the length your fingernails grow in 1 second. They are putting transistors that close to one another without touching at a distance that your fingernail grows in 1 second. To me, that is orders of magnitude exponentially more difficult than to build an atomic bomb, which is just kind of like it's hard to wrap your mind around just the like microchips and
Mm-hmm.
the extreme level of technology it takes to develop those things. Um,
Yeah. Well,
I don't know why I had that shower thought the other day, but it was just like that is kind of astounding and also a little bit scary that honestly, like building atomic bombs, and like I don't want to sound alarmist or anything, we're kind of going down a dark path here. But to me, that just seems way easier than building a microchip at this point.
one
And there's
thing.
tons of examples like that.
Well, what I was going to say is like I've heard it said before that the overwhelming majority of our technological development in the last, I mean, hell, 50 years has been bits, not atoms. I've heard that said before,
Say that
but
again.
the majority of our technological development in the last 40, 50 years has been in the form of bits, not atoms. So
Oh, yes, okay.
digitization computing, and which I think there is a narrative to say there because on one hand, if you ripped somebody out of the ground from 1950 and dropped them in the suburb I live right now, they'd still see cars, they'd still see houses, they'd still see lawns. There wouldn't be flying cars. There'd still be power lines. What would freak people out is this thing.
Hmm.
Like
For
what
sure.
the hell is that? Which on one hand you're like, oh wow, okay, maybe we really haven't made that much new technology, but the machines that make the chip fabs that make the chips that enable that to exist, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like how so it's like it's not so much that we haven't developed tools for exciting new technologies. Just those exciting new technologies have principally helped make computers better, and we perceive that development in the form of technology from like kind of us talking here virtually over the internet. But there is real concrete hard atom atoms that, development that has happened over the years.
Yeah.
You know, and your point about the
That
nuclear
atom
bomb,
development has enabled the bit development. It's just
yeah.
the atom development's abstracted away from 99.999% of all people.
Yeah, I mean, and you're part about the nuclear bomb too. I mean, again, that's a whole thing, but that just goes into how if I'm Aklo, going back to Aklo for a moment, the first thing they should do is just you just got to run from the word nuclear. Call it anything else.
Sure.
Like I just
Atomic energy.
yeah, atomic energy, radiative energy, rare earth energy. I mean, it uses uranium. Um, there are so many. Just run from the word nuclear. That's the first thing I would tell those people. I feel like the biggest hurdle they're ever going to have is just NIMBYs at these local AHJ meetings who are like, "Well, this is a cool idea, but can you do it 3 counties over?" You
Sure.
know, if you just call it something different, it just surprises me they haven't leaned into that. I guess they kind of are with small modular reactor and SMR. That kind of drops the word nuclear, but okay, you hear reactor. Okay, we're not that stupid. We still know it means
Yeah,
nuclear.
word map that lights up right next to nuclear.
Yeah.
Um, this nuclear talk got me thinking about you want to entertain a small conspiracy theory, not mine, but just one that I heard that might be
Fire away. Yeah, I'm very situational on these, so hit me with one.
Have you heard about all of the drones flying around? These drones that no one really knows what they're doing, where they're coming from, mostly over like New Jersey along the eastern seaboard.
I'll take your word for it. Keep going.
Okay, so I don't know how many drones have been sighted, but there's just been these random drones that people are observing. Like they're definitely verified, and the federal government has been rather quiet about what is going on, and a lot of people are pontificating that they're not foreign drones, they're US drones looking for a potentially stolen or missing nuclear warhead. And I shouldn't laugh at that because I thought of that's frightening. And I think overall that's a lot of conjecture. I don't necessarily, there's nothing substantiated saying that is actually newsworthy. This is, like I said, all dealing in conspiracies. But this whole drone thing definitely brings up just the radio silence on the topic almost from a federal level, from what I've seen, definitely allows and feeds the flames of conspiracy a bit of, it gives people things to pick at. So you haven't heard anything about this?
I definitely live in a bubble that's very tied to energy space, renewables, data center development, digital infrastructure. That's kind of the bubble I live in, and then map the finance on top of that to what supports it. My gut, my hot take hearing that live and cold, my hot take hearing that is, I'm sure there are drones flying around. Um, I'm sure that's probably true in any major city for to some extent of people testing
Sure.
various things. I feel as if you just think through stealing nuclear armaments, I know nothing about that world at all. It just feels to me like, is it more likely that is it more likely Amazon's trialing a new delivery service, or is it more likely that
Here's the
someone
kicker. These
and
drones, apparently, from what they've gathered, they're unable to register any like radio communications that are coming in and out of these drones, so they're not communicating with anything. So they feel like it's self-contained. Whatever information is being gathered is being stored on the drone, and then it will be downloaded once the drone comes back. So there's no radio, Bluetooth type communication coming from these. And from what they've and this is conjecture again, but there's no heat signature from these things either, which is unconventional and not normal for any sort of thing that's mechanically moving.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of bizarre and strange. I'm surprised people haven't gone to the alien thing yet. Um,
Well, I mean, I feel like
I'm sure some have.
Aliens is the low hanging fruit there, and I could wear you out for another half hour on aliens. What I generally think in these scenarios, anytime I hear a conspiracy theory, the older I get and the more involved in corporate America I've gotten, and the more involved in business I've gotten, I just believe them less because I just don't. It's just so hard to get 20 people all in on hiding a secret and believing something and working together and not failing and cracking based off their own mutual self-interest. It just, the thought of truly wide sweeping multi-party 100 people things happening. Okay, yes, I get it. Does the CIA have hundreds of thousands of employees and subcontract? I get it. And do they hold secrets? Yes, I get it. I think that's a little bit different. Um, but I think it's cool and it's fun stuff to talk about. And there
Sure.
was a time when I believed in aliens a lot more 4 or 5 years ago. And it's not that I don't buy it anymore. It's just I've come around to technology that would enable you to do interstellar travel would be just such a fundamental leap from what we understand that I doubt it would ever manifest itself in the form of something that resembles a vehicle. Um,
Sure.
and that's kind of where I sit with that, generally speaking. I mean, obviously, there's lizards underground running our government. That's obviously true, but
Oh yeah,
um,
that's yeah, absolutely, unequivocally.
but yet to kind of come full circle and close us out here. The Fed rate cuts obviously big news. Whether or not it's going to have a consequential impact on the bottom lines of businesses, I think is a different discussion from the impact on the markets. But
Let's
I
do
loved your
something fun.
point.
Let's do something fun. Let's
Oh,
next time we see each other, let's wager a beer on this, and I'll let you pick which side. I have an opinion, but I'll let you pick which side of the bet you went in on this. Do markets do sort of a little bounce today? Are markets up today or markets down today? And
today.
we'll today after they sold the news yesterday. What do you think will happen today? And we'll use the S&P 500 as the gauge for the bet.
Oh yeah, I'll take the over. I'll take the over on that one.
You think it will rally and go up?
I mean, rally might be a bit heavy-handed, but yeah, it'll
Well,
it'll
it will be in the green. It
it'll
will be
be
in
in
the
the
green.
green. Yeah.
Okay. I think it will also be in the green, but I'll take the red side of the bet, so we have a bet. So I'm with you, but we'll see what happens.
And the other thing, as we're closing out, one thing that's going to be a relatively common theme, I imagine, for the years to come here is again this integration of tech and energy and AI and how they're all sort of coalescing into one large new industry and something I find super interesting, and we'll be tracking it close here. So, with that said, appreciate everyone listening and supporting the show. We'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Yeah. See you, Scott.